Introducing Audiobook Top, your new home for the finest selection of audiobooks available anywhere.
All right, lean in close, because we're about to peel back the layers of time, long before the glowing rectangles in our pockets dictated our romantic fates. Before a swipe meant a potential date, before algorithms tried to match our souls. Imagine, for a moment, a world where finding the one, or even just a one, was an entirely analog affair. No curated profiles, no carefully chosen angles, no perfectly crafted bios. Just the raw, unadulterated mess and magic of human interaction. This was the vibrant, often chaotic stage upon which a certain young man named Tom Jones made his grand entrance. Think about it, how did people connect in the 18th century? There were no discovery pages, no instant messages. It was all about proximity, social circles, the serendipity of a chance encounter at a country fair, a shared glance across a crowded assembly, or the prolonged dance of polite society visits. Your reputation, good, bad, or scandalous, preceded you like a town crier, shaping perceptions long before you even opened your mouth. Your charm, your wit, the very way you carried yourself, *that* was your profile, broadcast for all to see, scrutinize, and, perhaps, fall for. And Tom Jones, he was the original walking, breathing, utterly irresistible swipe right. A foundling, yes, but blessed with an almost impossibly handsome face, a kind heart despite his spirited youthful indiscretions, and a natural vivacity that seemed to light up every room he entered. His appeal wasn't manufactured, it wasn't a product of strategic self-promotion, it simply was *. His genuine good humor, his infectious laughter, the sparkle in his eyes, these weren't bullet points on a dating app, they were his very essence. Women didn't need to read a meticulously crafted bio to know he was interesting, exciting, and perhaps, a little dangerous. They simply felt it, in the undeniable pull of his presence. From the innocent country maidens to the sophisticated, world-weary ladies of London, few were immune to Tom's innate magnetism. He wasn't looking for matches through a digital filter, he was living a life where every interaction held the potential for a spark, a misunderstanding, a passionate affair, or a genuine, deep affection. It was a world of public whispers, private passions, and societal pressures that made every romantic entanglement a high-stakes drama, a world where a simple walk in the woods could ignite a scandal, and a letter carried by hand could seal a fate. His journey, riddled with romantic missteps and true love's pursuit, wasn't about navigating algorithms. It was about navigating human nature itself. The intense longing, the thrill of the chase, the agony of separation, the joy of reunion, all unfolding in real time, face to face, with no screen to hide behind, and certainly no undo button. So, what can Tom Jones teach us? Here in our hyper-connected, yet often disconnected, present, he reminds us that the fundamental human quest for connection, the desire for love, lust, or companionship, is timeless. It strips away the digital veneer and brings us back to the enduring power of genuine chemistry, the thrill of an unexpected meeting, and the profound impact of simply being present with another person. Before dating apps, there was just us. Messy, glorious, scandalous, and utterly human. And sometimes there was just one extraordinary young man named Tom Jones, proving that the heart's desires, unbound by technology, are perhaps the truest, most compelling story of all. All right, settle in, my friends, draw closer, for I have a rather audacious proposition for you. Forget your sleek, minimalist self-help guides, those glossy manifestos penned by perfectly coiffed gurus whispering about your inner CEO. Today, we're going to talk about a life coach of a decidedly different vintage. One who prefers ale and boisterous company to green smoothies and quiet meditation. One who, I dare say, might just get himself into more scrapes in a single chapter than most modern self-help authors do in their entire meticulously curated lives. His name is Tom Jones. And yes, he's an 18th century orphan. Now, I can practically hear the collective eyebrow raise. An 18th century foundling, you ask, to guide my journey through the labyrinthine complexities of the 21st century. A young man born into scandal, frequently misled, perpetually impetuous, and prone to rather enthusiastic indiscretion. What possible wisdom could he offer us, denizens of the digital age, navigating careers, relationships, and existential dread with our therapists on speed dial? Ah, but this is precisely where the magic lies, isn't it? Because Tom Jones, this vibrant, flawed, irrepressibly good-hearted scamp, isn't just a character in a sprawling, hilarious, deeply insightful novel. He is, in essence, a living, breathing laboratory of human experience. He is us, stripped bare of our polished veneers and social media filters, thrust headlong into a world of temptation, betrayal, love, loss, and the often hilarious consequences of acting on impulse. Think of it: have you ever made a questionable decision driven by passion rather than prudence? Felt the sting of unjust accusation? Struggled to discern true virtue from slick hypocrisy? Stumbled through a maze of romantic entanglements, convinced you were utterly lost, only to find clarity in the most unexpected places? Then Tom Jones, my dear friend, has been there, done that, and probably landed himself in a duel or a debtor's prison for good measure. His journey, from the moment he's discovered shivering in a great man's bed, to his epic quest across the English countryside, isn't merely a historical romp. It's a masterclass in resilience. It's a profound exploration of what it means to be fundamentally good, even when you're spectacularly imperfect. He teaches us not through abstract maxims, but through lived, messy, gloriously human experience, that true goodness often lies not in perfect adherence to rules, but in the generosity of spirit, the capacity for empathy, and the courage to own one's mistakes. He'll show you how to navigate social hierarchies, from the snobbery of the gentry to the earthy wisdom of innkeepers, with an open heart and an unshakable sense of self. He'll illuminate the treacherous waters of love and desire, exposing the pitfalls of rash judgment and celebrating the enduring power of genuine affection. Most importantly, he demonstrates that while life will undoubtedly throw every conceivable obstacle in your path, a cheerful disposition, an honest heart, and a bit of luck can see you through to the most satisfying of conclusions. So, this isn't about adopting 18th century fashion or courting the consequences of your every whim. No, this is about discovering timeless truths through the most delightful, human, and utterly unexpected of guides. Tom Jones doesn't preach, he lives asterisk. He falls, he rises, he errs, he learns. And as we watch him, as we immerse ourselves in his riotous, heartfelt, and ultimately triumphant journey, we find ourselves watching a mirror reflecting our own struggles, our own hopes, and our own profound capacity for both folly and greatness. Are you ready, then, to step into his world, to let this spirited orphan become your most charming, most chaotic, and perhaps your most effective life coach yet? Good, because our adventure, with Tom Jones leading the way, is about to begin. Chapter 1. The Mystery of the Foundling. Good gentlefolk, draw near, and let me unfold a tale born of human nature, of mystery, benevolence, and no small measure of human folly. Our scene, if you please, is set in the picturesque county of Somersetshire, in the parish of Little Baddington. Here, amidst rolling hills and verdant meadows, stood the esteemed estate of one Mr. Allworthy, a gentleman whose very name, I dare say, hinted at the profound goodness residing within his breast. He was, to be precise, a man of such amiable temper and unblemished character that fortune had blessed him with a considerable estate, which he administered with wisdom and charity. Now, it was upon a crisp autumnal evening, after a 2-month sojourn in the bustling metropolis of London, that Mr. Allworthy returned to his peaceful abode. His household, anticipating his arrival, was abuzz with joyful preparation. A grand supper, fit for such a master, was being readied, and his diligent chambermaid, one Deborah Wilkins, a woman of unimpeachable moral rectitude, though perhaps a shade too zealous in her pronouncements, was attending to final touches in her master's bedchamber. Imagine the lamp casting dancing shadows as Deborah, with customary efficiency, turned back the bedclothes. But what sight should greet her eyes? Not the undisturbed linen she expected, but rather, nestled deep within the plush bedding, lay an infant. A babe, perhaps a few weeks old, sleeping with an innocence that belied the shock it was about to unleash upon the household. Deborah, whose astonishment outstripped her reasoned thought, did not merely gasp, she shrieked. A piercing cry that echoed through the quiet corridors, alerting every soul within the house. "A child," she wailed, her voice laced with a potent mixture of horror and righteous indignation. "A base, wicked creature, laid in my master's bed! Oh, the iniquity! The scandal! Where is the hussy who dared this foul deed?" Mr. Allworthy, ever composed, descended to inquire the cause of the clamor. Upon hearing Deborah's frantic account, he hastened to his room, where the small bundle lay. Unlike his excitable servant, his countenance betrayed not anger, but profound pity. He observed the child a boy, handsome, remarkably clean, dressed in garments of no mean quality, suggesting a parentage not entirely destitute, though clearly lost to shame or circumstance. "Silence, Deborah," he instructed gently but firmly, cutting short her tirade. "Let us not condemn before we comprehend. The poor infant is innocent. Fetch a wet nurse, and see this child cared for immediately." Whatever the circumstances, it is now under my roof, and no human, least of all a helpless babe, shall suffer neglect whilst I have the means to prevent it. His sister, Miss Bridget Allworthy, a lady of delicate sensibilities and a more complex interior than her brother's transparent goodness, also appeared, a flutter of concern and a touch of discomfort upon her face. The mystery was profound. Who could have so audaciously placed a child in the bed of the most respected man in the parish? A plea for charity, desperate abandonment, or something more calculated, more cunning? These questions hung heavy, unanswered, yet compelling, and thus by the simple, yet astonishing appearance of a nameless infant in Mr. Allworthy's bed, the stage was set. This helpless foundling, whose true parentage was shrouded in deepest mystery, was about to embark upon a life as extraordinary and eventful as its peculiar beginning. And it is this mystery, this benevolent act by a good man, that marks the true commencement of our story. Chapter 2. Good heart, bad judgment. Ah, my dear readers, come hither, and let us, with gentle reverence, turn another page in the unfolding tapestry of human lives. We left our worthy squire Allworthy amidst the tender pangs of sorrow, having just laid his beloved sister to rest. A man truly, whose heart was a veritable wellspring of benevolence, ever ready to succor the distressed, to illuminate the shadowed corners of human existence with his abundant generosity. It was this very fount of kindness that, on a morn yet crisp with the dew of dawn, led him forth from his grand manor, a solitary figure seeking solace in the quiet contemplation of his estate. He walked, you see, not with the hurried step of ambition, but with the measured gait of one whose soul sought accord with the harmonious rhythm of nature. And as the sun began to paint the eastern sky with hues of nascent day, a most unexpected sight greeted his eyes, not in the verdant expanse of his gardens, but within the very sanctum of his bedchamber. For upon his bed, a place usually reserved for repose and solitude, lay nestled a tiny bundled infant. A child innocent and utterly helpless, abandoned to the mercy of fortune. Now a lesser man, one whose spirit was not tempered by such profound goodness, might have recoiled in shock, or bristled with indignation at this most peculiar intrusion. But not our Allworthy. No, his noble heart, though still aching from recent loss, instantly swelled with an almost paternal tenderness. The sight of this fragile creature, so utterly dependent, stirred within him a compassion so deep, so innate, that all thought of inconvenience or scandal vanished like morning mist. A poor, helpless creature, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, left to perish perhaps, had Providence not guided its path to these very doors. And so, with a resolve born purely of a good heart, he determined then and there to take this foundling under his wing, to raise it as his own, providing it with all the comforts and advantages that his considerable fortune could bestow. A judgment, one might say, guided solely by the purest dictates of humanity, untainted by worldly cynicism or the calculating glare of reputation. But, alas, dear friends, even the brightest flame of human kindness casts a shadow, however faint, upon the often murky waters of societal judgment. The news, as such news always does, spread through the household with the speed of wildfire. A baby in the squire's bed! Tongues, those unruly members, began to wag with a ferocity that belied their owner's usual placidity. Whispers, at first tentative, then emboldened, began to circulate, each one painting a bolder, more scandalous picture than the last. Who could be the mother? Who the father? Every unmarried woman in the village, every servant girl with a fleeting admirer, suddenly found herself under the harsh spotlight of suspicion. And yet, with a peculiar swiftness that bordered on the predatorial, the finger of popular opinion began to point, with increasing certainty, towards two individuals, Miss Jenny Jones, a young woman of learning and modest circumstances, known for her sharp wit and agreeable person, and Mr. Partridge, the village schoolmaster, a man of letters, perhaps, but whose moral reputation, thanks to a few ill-placed jokes and an over-fondness for ale, was always slightly askew in the villagers' estimation. Ah, you see, the good heart acts from instinct, from the unblemished core of benevolence. But the world, it often judges from gossip, from appearances, from the convenient narratives spun by idle minds and envious spirits. And thus, what began as an act of pure compassion, a testament to Allworthy's unblemished soul, immediately became the fertile ground for suspicion, for calumny, for the very kind of bad judgment that often dogs the heels of true virtue. The stage, my friends, was now set not just for the nurture of a child, but for a trial of reputations, a crucible forged by the very human propensity to condemn first and inquire later. Chapter 3. First Love and Forbidden Fruit. Ah, my dear reader, When last we parted, we left our young Tom, a boy of no known parentage but undeniable spirit, blossoming under the benevolent roof of Squire Allworthy. Now, let us turn our gaze to his youth, and the tender stirrings of a heart destined for both joy and sorrow. For it was then that our Tom, barely out of boyhood's grip, first cast his ardent gaze upon Miss Sophia Western. Sophia, the very name a whisper of grace. She was the daughter of Squire Allworthy's neighbor, a creature fashioned, it seemed, from spring mornings and summer's gentle breezes. Her eyes, like clear pools reflecting the sky, held a kindness that drew Tom in. Their encounters, though often chaperoned, were charged with that peculiar electricity known only to young hearts on the precipice of discovery. A shared glance, a whispered word, a playful chase, these were the nascent seeds of what we, with hindsight, term first love. Pure, untainted, unburdened by the world's cruel calculus of fortune and birthright. But alas, true love, especially of this spontaneous variety, often finds itself amidst thorns, a forbidden fruit in society's grand orchard. For Tom was a foundling, a child of mystery and charity, while Sophia was the cherished heiress of a considerable estate. Their paths, by conventional reckoning, were never meant to truly converge. The world, as it often does, stood ready to declare such a union an impossibility. And speaking of forbidden unions, or at least, those forged under peculiar auspices, we must turn to Squire Allworthy's sister, Miss Bridget. Ah, Bridget! A lady whose outward piety was as unyielding as her gaze was often cold. For years, she was the embodiment of the prim spinster, her affections reserved solely for her brother and a righteous disdain for worldly follies. Yet, beneath this veneer of icy virtue, a longing, perhaps for status, perhaps for companionship, began to stir. It was into this carefully constructed edifice of rectitude that Captain Blifil sailed, a man whose ambition was as keen as his piety was performative. He saw not the woman, but the considerable fortune attached to the Allworthy name. With calculating charm and a well-rehearsed air of devotion, he laid siege to Bridget's defenses. It was a courtship less of passion and more of strategic maneuver, culminating in a marriage that surprised all and delighted none, save the captain himself. An alliance born not of love, but of convenience and ambition, a rather less palatable fruit than Tom and Sophia's innocent budding romance. From this curious union, dear readers, was born Master Blifil, a legitimate heir, hailed by society, destined to inherit wealth and status. His birth, ironically, served only to underscore Tom's precarious position, the foundling against the rightful son. The stage was thus set, not merely for a tale of love, but for a poignant drama of fate, class, and the often cruel distinctions that divide human hearts. For even as Tom's heart soared with the exquisite agony of first love, the shadow of his uncertain parentage, and the impenetrable barriers of station, already began to lengthen across his path, marking his tender affections as a fruit society would deem strictly forbidden. Chapter 4. The Hypocrisy of Mentors. Ah, dear reader, if ever a benevolent heart knew the pangs of a father's grief, it was Mr. Allworthy's in the wake of our young Tom Jones's latest, shall we say, imprudence. The tale of Molly Seagrim, her red cloak, and a certain rather public disclosure of a burgeoning bump, had reached his ears, and indeed his very soul. Here was a man who, though possessed of every earthly blessing, cherished above all else the moral rectitude of those he held dear. To see his cherished ward, the very image of his own youthful spirit, stumble so spectacularly, caused him a sorrow far deeper than any financial loss. It was into this hallowed hall of Mr. Allworthy's pained reflection that our two esteemed philosophers, Mr. Thwackum and Mr. Square, sallied forth, each eager to dissect the errant youth's character and, more importantly, to press their own peculiar philosophies upon the distressed Allworthy. First, Thwackum, with his usual zealous countenance, a man who saw the hand of divine retribution in every falling leaf, let alone every fallen woman. Here, sir, he began, his voice a pronouncement rather than a mere utterance. Here is the wretched fruit of natural depravity, left unchastened by the rod of righteous indignation. This boy, sir, this reprobate, demonstrates a soul utterly devoid of grace, lost to the flesh, and requiring not merely correction, but scourging. It is the very essence of human corruption, unredeemed by the rigors of true faith and proper, firm instruction. Had he but heeded my teachings, had he but embraced the terror of divine judgment, such ungodliness would never have blossomed in his bosom. He needs a discipline, Mr. Allworthy, that only the righteous hand can deliver. One could almost see the brimstone emanating from his fervent expressions, his self-importance inflating with every damning syllable. His counsel, as always, tasted more of personal power than genuine pastoral care. No sooner had Thwackum, with a triumphant and self-satisfied puff, paused for breath, than Mr. Square, ever the elegant foil, glided into the breach. Square, the philosopher of the eternal fitness of things, who found all virtue in the harmonious balance of nature's grand design, now took up his own intellectual cudgel. "My dear sir," he commenced, with a tone of measured, academic lament, "how deeply unfortunate it is to witness such a gross deviation from the rule of right, the very essence of that inherent beauty and order which nature herself has so exquisitely crafted. This young man, Mr. Allworthy, displays a shocking disregard for the principles of natural justice and propriety. His passions, alas, have overwhelmed his reason, throwing the very fabric of his moral being into disarray. He acts not in accordance with the eternal fitness of things, but rather with the chaotic impulses of an uncultivated mind. Such an egregious error, such a blight upon the rational order, demands not merely lamentation, but a swift and judicious restoration of balance. The equilibrium of virtue has been disturbed, and it is our duty to guide him, however forcefully, back to that perfect symmetry of conduct." It was a curious spectacle, indeed, to behold these two intellectual adversaries, Thwackum, who saw all good flowing from divine decree, and Square, who rooted all virtue in inherent human reason and natural law, finding such fervent, uncharacteristic agreement on one single point, the absolute condemnation of Tom Jones. Their usual philosophical sparring, their endless debates on grace versus nature, on revelation versus reason, were suspended in a mutual, almost gleeful, denunciation of the young man's transgressions. Each, in his own distinct manner, saw in Tom's failing not a moment for compassion or guidance, but a convenient proof of their own respective docked supremacy and a fertile ground for displaying their moral superiority. Poor Mr. Allworthy, a man whose heart bled for the boy, found himself trapped between these two self-appointed arbiters of morality, their learned pronouncements, steeped in their distinct but equally uncharitable perspectives, weighed heavily upon his gentle spirit. They presented him with a choice, not between right and wrong, but between two different flavors of harsh judgment, each served with a generous side of self-righteousness. It was a stark reminder, dear reader, that even the most erudite and pious among us can, alas, wield their wisdom not as a lamp to guide, but as a hammer to strike, especially when a convenient scapegoat presents himself for the greater glory of their own unblemished virtue. The true hypocrisy lay not in their differing creeds, but in the shared zeal with which they elevated their own flawed interpretations above the simple, suffering truth of a human heart. Chapter 5. The Seduction of the Countryside. Now, gentle reader, having introduced certain dispositions, it is high time we cast our gaze upon a character whose soul was wrought by nature herself. We speak, of course, of our foundling, Master Tom Jones, a youth blessed, or perhaps burdened, with a spirit as vigorous as the English soil. It was in those halcyon days, when spring, with wanton charms, disrobed the trees and bedecked the meadows with green and gold, that our Tom, verging upon manhood, found himself, with increasing frequency, drawn from the well-ordered yet stifling precincts of Paradise Hall. For, while learning and piety held sway within, the true university of life, with its profoundest lessons, lay without in the open volume of the countryside. This grand instructress, Nature, began her subtle seduction of young Tom, not with artifice but irresistible simplicity. The air, pregnant with wild thyme and fresh earth, a draught of freedom. The rustling leaves, whispering secrets, beckon him deeper. The sun, warming his skin, awakened sensation, calling forth an unnameable longing. He would wander through ancient woods and along meandering streams, his heart swelling with a joy unknown to those confined to drawing rooms. It was upon one such excursion, as the mellow afternoon sun dappled through the oaken canopy, that Tom, pursuing an elusive rabbit to Widow Seagram's cot, espied a vision that set his youthful blood astar. There, by a shallow brook, her skirts immodestly kilted for gathering watercress, stood Molly Seagram. Her cheeks, flushed from the open air, glowed with rustic health. Her laugh, as she playfully splashed a stray lamb, rang with a native melody. She possessed not the refined graces of a lady, but a robust beauty, a frank, untamed allure that spoke directly to the nascent passions of a young man. Her gaze, meeting his, held a spark both innocent and knowing, a primitive invitation to the dance of life that nature so freely offers. In that moment, amidst the burgeoning life, Tom felt a peculiar quickening within his breast. It was a powerful confluence of beauty's admiration and nature's bounty. The earth beneath his feet seemed to vibrate with a new understanding, a profound revelation. The seduction was complete, an awakening force, drawing him into the grand drama of existence, where primal urges found honest expression amidst God's unvarnished splendor. He returned to Paradise Hall that evening, not merely invigorated, but profoundly stirred, carrying within him the nascent seeds of experience that would, in time, blossom into the full, glorious, and sometimes tumultuous, flower of his youth. Chapter 6. The Fall from Grace. Our tale returns now to the verdant grounds of Paradise Hall, where our young Tom, still basking in the warmth of Mr. Allworthy's esteem, was about to experience the first chill winds of misfortune. He, with a heart as open as the summer sky, had found himself a fledgling, a tiny, fluttering thing, and with all the earnestness of youth, intended it no harm, only companionship. He held it gently, a spark of pure joy in his eyes. Blifil approaching Tom, a sly smile playing on his lips, voice dripping with feigned concern. "Oh Tom, what have you there? A poor bird, snatched from its mother's nest. How cruel a sport, brother, to confine such a creature." Tom frowning, genuinely surprised. "Cruel? Nay, Blifil, I meant it no ill. I found it fallen, and thought to give it succor, a warm place in my pocket, perhaps. I meant to tame it, to give it comfort." Blifil shaking his head with mock sadness. "Tame it, or slowly starve it, deprived of its natural liberty, its mother's call unheard. Our good uncle, I fear, would not approve of such wantonness. He speaks often of the sanctity of all God's creatures, of the kindness due to every living thing. It would be a terrible shame, would it not, if he were to see you, a favored ward, engaged in such thoughtless capture. It pains my heart to think of his disappointment." Narrator Tom, ever susceptible to the slightest hint of wrongdoing, and possessing a heart too honest to perceive deceit, felt a sudden pang of guilt. The thought of displeasing Mr. Allworthy, whom he adored, was a torment worse than any physical pain. His generous nature, alas, often led him astray not through malice, but through an excess of feeling and a deficit of worldly cunning. Tom, his brow furrowed with distress, looking from Blifil to the tiny bird, disappoint him. "Oh, never? If it truly be a sin, Blifil, then I must undo it. I would not for the world cause my uncle a moment's sorrow." Narrator just then, as fate, or rather the sly Blifil, would have it, Mr. Allworthy emerged from his study, his brow furrowed in contemplation of some weighty matter. His eye fell upon the boys just as Tom, swayed by Blifil's false piety, opened his hands and released the small prisoner. It fluttered away free. But to Allworthy's benevolent yet stringent gaze, this was not an act of mercy, but the culmination of a cruel sport, a final, disdainful dismissal. His usually mild countenance clouded with grave displeasure, Allworthy voice booming, tinged with profound disappointment that pierced Tom's very soul. "Thomas, what unfeeling act is this? To toy with a creature's freedom, then cast it aside as if its life were a mere trifle. Have I taught you nothing of compassion, of the sacred trust we hold over the weaker beings? Is this the gratitude you show for the roof over your head, the lessons I impart to delight in the suffering of the innocent, or worse, to treat life with such contemptuous indifference?" Tom, his face paling, heart sinking into an abyss, tears welling in his eyes. "Uncle, I did not mean Blifil," said narrator, but the words caught in his throat. How could he, in that moment of profound shame and confusion, betray Blifil and appear to shift blame? His noble spirit, wounded as it was, recoiled from such an act. He stood silent, the picture of guilt. Allworthy, his voice softening slightly, but still heavy with sorrow. Blifil said, "What, boy? That cruelty is commendable? No, Thomas, I suspect this is a heartless inclination, a seed of malice I had hoped never to discover in you. Such actions speak of a nature far from the benevolent spirit I cherish. A noble heart finds joy in nurture, not neglect. This is a fall indeed, from the grace I believed you possessed. I am profoundly disappointed." Narrator. And so, the first stone was cast, not by Tom, but by circumstance, and by the artful hand of envy. Tom stood accused not of a fleeting childish fancy but of a fundamental flaw in character. He, whose greatest fault was a too open heart, now felt the sting of profound injustice, the bitter taste of a love seemingly withdrawn. Blifil meanwhile stood by, his face a mask of sorrowful piety, inwardly gloating at the success of his subtle venom. This was Tom's baptism by fire, his first agonizing lesson in the world's capacity for misunderstanding, and the treacherous path of appearances. His grace, once absolute in Allworthy's eyes, was now tarnished, a consequence of kindness misinterpreted, and malice left unchecked. The fall, though outwardly small, marked a significant descent into the trials that awaited our young hero. Chapter 7. On the road, a world of characters. Ah, my dear readers, come hither, draw close your chairs, and let us, with a shared twinkle in our eyes, cast our gaze upon the unfolding panorama of human existence. Our young Tom, you will recall, has bid a somewhat hasty farewell to his familiar fields, and now, with the ever-loquacious Partridge by his side, finds himself upon that great, dusty stage of life, the open road. It is a curious thing, this road, a veritable crucible where the true metal of man is tested and revealed. No longer confined by the strictures of hearth and village, where every soul knows his neighbor's grandfather and every gesture is an inherited ritual, here, on the highway, masks slip, and the boundless diversity of our species truly blossoms. Our travelers, Tom and Partridge, fresh from their rustic cocoon, became in essence a pair of unwitting philosophers, observing the grand pageant of humanity with eyes ever widening. Their first stop, a bustling inn, served as a prelude. Here, the aroma of roasting meat mingled with the clamor of a dozen different lives. They met a portly merchant whose every utterance was a calculation of profit and loss, his heart seemingly a ledger sheet. Partridge, ever the cautious soul, whispered to Tom, "Mark him well, master, such men measure friendship by the weight of a purse." Tom, however, saw not just the merchant, but the weary father longing for his distant hearth, a glint of humanity beneath the calculating facade. Further along, they encountered a formidable lady, journeying in a carriage of such grandeur it fairly intimidated the very dust. She spoke in an affected whisper, her every gesture a studied elegance, yet her discourse, when overheard, was nothing but a litany of complaints against her servants and the imperfections of the world beyond her gilded cage. Partridge, aghast, observed such airs, "Master, 'tis a peacock, not a woman." Tom, with his usual charity, mused, "Perhaps, friend, her grandeur is as much a burden as a blessing, for it seems to deny her simple joy." Then there was the soldier, a swaggering fellow with a scar that looked more dramatic than truly fearsome, his tales of battle ever more grand with each pint of ale. He spoke of honor and glory, of bravery and conquest. Partridge, a man of peace, found him terrifying, a walking tempest. But Tom, with his quick sympathy, saw the loneliness in his eyes, the underlying need for validation, perhaps even the simple desire to forget the mundane anxieties of his own lot. He saw a man playing a role, not entirely for deception, but for solace. Indeed, it was this very phenomenon, the playing of roles, that Tom began to discern. On the road, men and women were not merely themselves, but also the characters they wished to be, or those circumstances had forced them into. The scholar, quoting Latin as if it were currency; the parson, whose piety seemed to vanish with the setting sun; the farmer, whose rough hands belied a surprisingly tender humor. Each was a fragment of a vast, intricate mosaic, sometimes harmonious, sometimes clashing, but always fascinating. Partridge, prone to superstition and simplistic judgment, often saw only the surface, the miserly, the haughty, the braggart. He found solace in categories, a way to make sense of the bewildering array. But Tom, with his generous spirit and his innate ability to connect with the human heart, saw deeper. He saw the shared vulnerabilities, the universal desires for love, recognition, and belonging, albeit expressed in 1,000 different garbs. The road, far from being a mere passage between points, became for Tom a grand theater, where the raw, unvarnished spirit of humankind performed its most captivating drama. And as they journeyed onward, each new face was but another line in the ever-unfolding script of human nature, a chapter in the endlessly complex book of life. Chapter 8. The Man on the Hill, a warning against cynicism. My dear reader, pull up a chair by the hearth, and let me tell you of a man whose tale, though tinged with sorrow, holds a vital lesson for us all. High upon a desolate hill, amidst nature's rugged beauty, our good-hearted Tom Jones, ever prone to wander, chanced upon a solitary figure. A man of mature years, his countenance, etched by time and solitude, spoke more of disillusionment than of peace. This was the Man on the Hill, and his story, I assure you, mirrors the human condition. Imagine, if you will, a young man, much like our Tom, full of spirits and bright hopes, embarking upon the grand stage of the world. Born to good standing, blessed with intellect, he was sent to Oxford, that crucible of learning. But alas, even in those halls, temptation found him. Gaming, revelry, careless company, these siren songs lured him from earnest study. Debts mounted, good name tarnished, and soon his family's loving embrace was withdrawn, replaced by the cold shoulder of paternal disapproval. Cast adrift, he sought his fortune in the bustling labyrinth of London. Here he imagined merit would surely find its reward. But oh, how swiftly the scales fell from his eyes! He witnessed avarice cloaked in piety, ambition masquerading as public service, and friendships that dissolved quicker than snow. Every hopeful pursuit seemed to collide with human perfidy. He tried the law only to find justice a commodity. He served in the military, only to see courage exploited and honor perverted. He loved, with the earnest heart of youth, only to be betrayed, her vows fleeting as a morning mist. These successive blows, each a splinter in his once optimistic soul, did not harden him into villainy. But they twisted his perception of humanity, turning youthful ardor into bitter resentment. He inherited a fortune later, yet even wealth brought no joy, only more disillusionment, a further testament to the world's inherent corruption. And so, he retreated. Not to mend the world nor forgive its trespasses, but to isolate himself from its perceived vileness. He built his hermitage on that lonely hill, convinced mankind was a species beyond redemption, inherently selfish, driven solely by malice. His life became a testament to unchecked disappointment, a living, breathing warning. For what is cynicism, my friends, but hope grown weary, love turned sour? It is a cage we build for ourselves, trapping hearts and minds within a narrow view of despair. It blinds us to genuine acts of kindness, selfless deeds, pure affections that, like rare flowers, still bloom in unexpected corners of our world. The man on the hill, in his retreat, found intellectual satisfaction in his bitter philosophy, but at what cost? He sacrificed joy, companionship, and the possibility of finding beauty in the struggle. This, then, is the profound lesson his existence whispers to us. While wisdom often springs from disillusionment, we must never permit it to curdle into cynicism. To see the world's flaws is wise, to dwell solely on them is to be impoverished. Acknowledge the shadows, yes, but never forget the light. For even amidst deceptions, there remains a persistent flicker of goodness, a vital spark of humanity that is worth believing in, worth fighting for. And it is in that belief, that refusal to surrender to wholesale despair, that true strength and enduring happiness lie. Be wary, my friends, of the seductive easy path of the cynic. It leads only to a hill of one's own, beautiful perhaps, but profoundly lonely. Chapter 9. The comedy of missed connections. Sophia, having by a fortunate turn of circumstance, secured a quiet lodging in the very heart of the bustling metropolis, found herself adrift in a sea of solitary reflection. Her heart, a tumultuous vessel, was tossed between the fierce tempests of paternal wrath and the gentle breezes of a nascent hope. Surely, she reasoned, Mr. Jones, with his accustomed ardor, must be seeking her, if not already within the city's labyrinthine embrace. It was upon this delicate fancy that she resolved to commit her distress, and a hint of her whereabouts, to paper. A letter, therefore, was penned, a delicate confection of anxiety and affection, addressed simply to Mr. Jones, Esquire, at his usual haunts, a direction, alas, more poetic than practical, and destined to be the first thread in our ensuing comedy of errors. This precious missive, a veritable beacon of longing, she entrusted to a certain rosy-cheeked chambermaid, one Polly, whose understanding of London's intricate byways was, unfortunately, no greater than her comprehension of Platonic philosophy. Polly, with a cheerful bob of her head and a promise of utmost discretion and dispatch, set forth, her heart buoyant with the honor of so important an errand. Meanwhile, our hero, Mr. Jones, was indeed but 2 streets distant, ensconced in a modest lodging of his own, musing, as was his wont, upon the fickle nature of fortune and the elusive shadow of his dearest Sophia. He was, at this very hour, engaged in assisting a distressed widow, whose landlord, a man of meager heart, threatened eviction for a mere trifle. This benevolent act, while unquestionably noble, was precisely what kept him from his own chambers, a delay of but a quarter hour, yet one of monumental consequence. Polly, setting forth with Sophia's letter clutched in her hand, encountered a veritable carnival of metropolitan distractions. First, a street vendor's shrill cry of fresh oranges drew her eye. Then, a passing regiment of His Majesty's Guardsmen drew her fervent admiration, and finally, a particularly vigorous quarrel between a fishwife and a chimney sweep drew her breathless, wide-eyed attention, causing her to dally a good half-hour at the corner of Fleet Street, utterly oblivious to the urgency of her mission. When at last she resumed her errand, her sense of direction, already tenuous, was entirely undone by the commotion. She mistook a bustling public house, the Jolly Beggar, for the quiet private dwelling Sophia had described. Seeing a young gentleman of similar build and age entering the establishment, she, with more haste than accuracy, thrust the letter into his unsuspecting hand, then, with a curtsy, beat a hasty retreat. This gentleman, a certain Mr. Jeremy Bumpkin from the remote shires, on his very first visit to the metropolis, was utterly confounded by the unsolicited communication. "A letter for Mr. Jones," he mumbled, his face a picture of bucolic perplexity. He glanced at the quaint address, usual haunts, and, assuming it to be some sort of city prank, tucked it into his pocket, and promptly forgot it, consumed by the novel delights of London ale and conversation. An hour later, Tom returned to his lodging, a sigh escaping him for the lack of news from Sophia, his heart heavy with unspoken questions. At the precise same moment, Sophia, having received no reply, no token, no glimmer of hope, concluded, with a despairing certainty, that Tom was either absent from the city or, worse, shamefully indifferent to her plight. Her heart, which had fluttered with the tender wings of hope, now sank into a profound and mistaken abyss of sorrow. Thus did the capricious hand of fate, aided by a charming chambermaid's distraction, a benevolent heart's delay, and a rustic's unintentional befuddlement, conspire to hold our lovers apart. A mere stone's throw, a moment's lapse, a misplaced thought, such were the slender threads upon which hung the momentous issues of affection and happiness. Oh, the grand comedy wrought by such trifling, yet devastating, missed connections. Chapter 10 Scandal at the Inn. The evening, which had promised quiet rest, swiftly plunged into drama, as fate often weaves its bewildering tapestry. Our young hero, Tom Jones, newly arrived at the bustling Upton Inn after parting with Mrs. Waters, found his thoughts interrupted. A clamor erupted from an adjoining room, a woman's shriek, a man's furious bellow. Domestic discord amplified by thin walls. Tom, ever the champion, felt immediate concern. Was it Mrs. Waters? Was Northerton at his old tricks? Without hesitation, Tom burst in. A gentleman, face contorted with rage, held a lady by the hair, threatening blows. She struggled, crying out. Her garments disarrayed, face pale with terror. Though her back was mostly to him, Tom recognized the elegant figure, the dark hair, surely Mrs. Waters. "Unhand her, sirrah!" Tom commanded, his voice ringing. He could not bear to see a woman so abused, least of all one of recent acquaintance. The gentleman, startled, released the lady, who collapsed, sobbing. He turned fury upon Tom. "And who, pray, are you, insolent fellow, to interfere in a husband's just chastisement of his faithless wife?" Tom stood firm. "Husband or no, sir, you shall not lay violent hand upon a lady in my presence." "She is my wife, sir!" roared the gentleman, stamping. "My Mrs. Fitzpatrick! Fled from me, found here, in scandalous fashion, with another, no doubt." Tom's mind reeled. Mrs. Fitzpatrick *, he glanced at the lady. Her face, now visible, tear-streaked, was indeed Mrs. Waters. Yet the gentleman insisted otherwise. "Whether she be your wife or not," Tom declared, determined, "you shall not behave as a brute. Your conduct is ungentlemanly, sir, and I shall not permit it." This was the spark. The gentleman, Mr. Fitzpatrick, a man of quick temper, lunged. A fierce struggle ensued. The room, a stage for drama, became an arena. Chairs overturned, curses flew, and the terrified cries of Mrs. Waters, caught in this whirlwind, added to the uproar. The landlord, landlady, and servants, drawn by the cacophony, peered in. The scandal was public, broadcast through the inn's walls. Tom, valiant, grappled with a man possessed by jealous fury, trying to protect a lady whose identity was muddled. Blows were exchanged. Mr. Fitzpatrick, smaller, fought with a badger's ferocity, convinced he defended his honor. Tom, larger, hesitated to inflict serious harm on a man believing himself a wronged husband. In the chaos, Mrs. Waters, seizing opportunity, slipped away, her true identity still obscured from Mr. Fitzpatrick's inflamed mind. Her escape went unnoticed amidst the din, leaving Tom to face Mr. Fitzpatrick's continued assault and the growing crowd. When the brawl subsided, Tom having restrained his opponent, the room was a shambles, the inn abuzz. The landlady wrung her hands. "Mercy upon us! Such an ado!" Two gentlemen brawling over a woman. "In my house, the constables will be called." Ruined, utterly ruined. Tom, breathless, disheveled, stood amidst the wreckage, a bewildered victor. He had championed a lady, but stepped into a grand scandal, mistaken identity, marital strife, a public spectacle for Upton. The quiet evening had dissolved into a maelstrom, leaving him to ponder human affairs. The night, it seemed, was far from over. Chapter 11, Sophia's Rebellion. Listen closely, for here we arrive at a moment, dear readers, when the very foundations of the Western household are not merely rattled, but quite thoroughly upturned by the gentle, yet indomitable spirit of our Sophia. The stage is set, the players poised, though few suspect the dramatic turn affairs are about to take. Squire Western, a man whose pleasures were as simple as they were robust, a hunt, a hearty meal, and the unquestioning obedience of his daughter, had just returned from a particularly successful day. His face, ruddy from the chase, was beaming as he found Sophia. "Well, Sophie, my girl!" he boomed, thumping her affectionately and perhaps a little too forcefully on the back. "Good news, my dear! Better than any fox I've run to ground today! You're to be married!" Sophia, who had been engaged in some delicate embroidery, dropped her needle, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and incomprehension. "Married, Papa," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "To whom?" The squire, oblivious to the tremor in her voice, waved his hand dismissively. "Why, to young Blifil, of course! Who else? He's a good, solid lad, and the alliance will join our estates beautifully. His uncle, good Mr. Allworthy, has given his blessing. It's settled, my dear, settled." A cold dread enveloped Sophia. "Blifil!" The thought alone sent a shiver down her spine. His pious cant, his sanctimonious demeanor, his insufferable self-regard, all were anathema to her honest, spirited heart. And then there was the ghost of another face, another laugh, another pair of eyes that haunted her dreams. "But Papa," she began, finding her voice, though it trembled still, "I cannot. I do not like Mr. Blifil." The squire's jovial expression instantly curdled into a mask of fury. "Not like him?" he bellowed, his voice rattling the very window panes. "What's not to like? He's a gentleman, he's got prospects, and he's going to be your husband. Is that clear, missy? I am your father. I know what's best for you. You'll marry him, and that's the end of it." Sophia, though her heart pounded like a drum, met his gaze, her gentle features hardening with an unexpected resolve. "I cannot, Papa," she repeated, her voice clearer now, steadier. "My heart is not his. I cannot give my hand where I cannot give my affection. It would be a sin, a misery for us both." She knew the words would only fuel his rage, but she could not speak otherwise. Western's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. "A sin, a misery," he spluttered, advancing on her. "You dare contradict your father? You'll marry him or you'll see every penny of your inheritance vanish! You'll be locked away until you come to your senses! Is that what you want, girl? To defy me, your own flesh and blood?" Sophia stood her ground, though tears now welled in her eyes. The thought of a lifetime tethered to Blifil, a lifetime without the faintest spark of joy or genuine connection, was more terrifying than any threat her father could conjure. She loved her father, in her own way, but this demand was a violation of her very soul. She would not could not yield. As he continued his tirade, pacing and gesturing wildly, a quiet, desperate resolve began to form within her. She would rather face the wide, uncertain world alone than suffer such a fate. There was only one path left for her, a path born of courage and desperation. She would run. And so, our gentle Sophia, whose spirit was as pure as the dawn, found herself standing at the precipice of a momentous decision. Her father's rage might have been a tempest, but her own will, forged in the fires of true affection and moral conviction, proved to be an unyielding rock. The stage was set, not merely for a wedding, but for a journey, a flight from a destiny she utterly refused to embrace. For sometimes, my friends, even the most delicate flower must break free from its roots to truly bloom. Chapter 12. The puppet master's game. The morning sun, though it promised a day of pleasant warmth, shone with a peculiar obliquity upon the breakfast table at Allworthy Hall. A sense of disquiet, as impalpable as the faint steam rising from the teacups, seemed to cling to the very air, unnoticed by most, yet keenly felt by those whose particular genius lay in the observation, and indeed the manipulation of such atmospheres. Young Master Blifil, ever the model of composed piety, sat in his accustomed place, his eyes, frequently cast heavenward in silent gratitude, now and then descending to fix upon the countenance of his generous uncle. His brow was furrowed, not with grief or vexation, but with that exquisite blend of concern and regret that so perfectly disguised the deeper machinations of his heart. Tom Jones, meanwhile, his spirits still somewhat buoyant despite the recent reprimands, was engrossed in a discussion with the parson concerning a passage from Seneca, little suspecting that the very openness of his youthful mind was at that moment being distilled into a potent draught of poison by a hand he considered fraternal. Uncle Blifil began, his voice a soft murmur, barely rising above the clatter of cutlery. "I confess my conscience troubles me mightily. To speak ill of one's kin is a sin I would avoid, yet to remain silent, when such silence might permit a greater mischief," he trailed off, allowing the unspoken threat to swell in the benevolent Allworthy's imagination. Mr. Allworthy, a man whose heart was as open as the day, looked up, his brow furrowed with genuine apprehension. "What is it, my boy? Speak plainly. No evil can be remedied by whispering." Blifil sighed a delicate, almost imperceptible exhalation. "It is Master Jones. I heard him just yesterday in the stable yard, speaking with the gamekeeper. A matter of a certain wager concerning the outcome of the local elections. And, I fear, not merely a wager, but an active encouragement of certain unruly elements to support a candidate known for his less than savory disposition, and indeed, his utter contempt for the established order." Mr. Allworthy's benevolent face clouded. Tom, though spirited, was known for a certain impetuosity, but to meddle in such affairs, and in such company, it touched a raw nerve of civic responsibility and social hierarchy that Allworthy held dear. He spoke, Blifil continued, seizing the moment, of shaking the very foundations and turning the tables upon the old guard. Words, I fear, that speak of a dangerous radicalism, quite unbecoming of a young man under your patronage, uncle. I did attempt to reason with him, but he merely laughed, declaring it a bit of sport and a trifle. Tom, oblivious, laughed at a witty remark from the parson, his genuine mirth, to the now prejudiced ear of Allworthy, seeming to confirm Blifil's carefully constructed narrative of reckless disregard. A trifle. Allworthy mused aloud, his gaze falling upon Tom with a renewed sense of unease. To encourage disaffection, to sow discord amongst the populace. These are not trifles, Blifil, but the very seeds of anarchy. Blifil nodded gravely, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing about the corners of his lips. The game was well and truly afoot. He had merely provided the script, whispered the cues, and now, like a true puppet master, he watched as the strings he had pulled so subtly began to tighten, drawing Allworthy's affections away from Tom, pulling them into the labyrinth of suspicion and disapproval he had so artfully constructed. Tom, poor honest Tom, remained blissfully unaware, a marionette dancing to a tune he could not hear, guided by hands he could not see, while the true player sat back, contemplating his next move. For in the grand theater of human life, some find their greatest pleasure not in participating, but in directing the tragicomic drama of others. The curtain, it seemed, had only just begun to rise on this particular act of manipulation. Chapter 13, Welcome to London, the urban jungle. And so, my dear readers, our intrepid Tom, fresh from the verdant lanes and honest hearths of the countryside, found himself at last upon the very threshold of that colossal human ant-hill, that glittering labyrinth, that sprawling behemoth they called London. The journey, though not without its minor incidents of roadside inns and curious encounters, had been but a prelude, a gentle overture to the cacophony that now assaulted his senses. Imagine, if you will, the sudden, deafening crescendo, the clang of iron-shod wheels on cobblestones, a ceaseless, grinding symphony of commerce and transit, the guttural cries of hawkers, each proclaiming the unrivaled virtues of their wares with the zeal of a revivalist preacher, the distant, perpetual murmur of 10,000 conversations, a hum that seemed to vibrate through the very air itself. The scent, too, was a complex tapestry, a pungent blend of coal smoke, damp earth, horse dung, and, yes, the occasional whiff of something less discernible but unmistakably urban. Tom, his broad shoulders slightly hunched against the invisible press of the crowds, stood for a moment, an island of rustic bewilderment amidst the surging tide of humanity. His eyes, accustomed to the sweeping vistas of Somerset, now struggled to comprehend the sheer verticality and density of the brick-and-mortar canyons that hemmed him in. Carriages, splendid and shoddy alike, jostled for precedence, sedan chairs, like enclosed, human-born cocoons, flitted past, hinting at the secret lives within, and the footpaths, a veritable river of diverse humanity, flowed ceaselessly in both directions. This was no mere town, nor even a grand city as he understood it. This was an ecosystem unto itself, a living, breathing entity with its own peculiar laws and predators. The very air felt different, charged with an energy both exhilarating and faintly menacing. Here, the open frankness of the countryman, his simple trust, seemed an ill-fitting garment, a transparency that might invite more scrutiny than welcome. One observed faces a fleeting gallery of ambition, destitution, calculation, and desperation that held secrets the countryside rarely bothered to cultivate. Our Tom, with his heart still beating to the rhythm of honest affection and his head filled with the straightforward morality taught by Allworthy, was, in truth, entering a jungle far more intricate and perilous than any mere thicket of trees. For in this concrete wilderness, the beasts were not lions or wolves, but rather the cunning of the sharper, the wiles of the coquette, the rapacity of the merchant, and the insidious venom of gossip. Appearances, he would soon learn, were everything, and often utterly deceptive. A fine coat might conceal a villain, just as plain attire might hide a sage. He felt the stirrings of an excitement, certainly the thrill of the new, the promise of possibility, but underneath, a nascent apprehension, a vague sensing that the rules here were entirely rewritten. His virtue, his very good nature, might prove not a shield but a target. For London, dear reader, does not merely absorb the innocent, it often processes them, refining some into steel, dissolving others into oblivion. This colossal city, this urban jungle, lay before him, vast and indifferent, ready to test the very core of his being. and Tom, with the same unflinching spirit that had carried him thus far, took his first tentative step into its formidable embrace. Chapter 14. The patronage of Lady Bellaston. My dear readers, it is with a certain melancholic wisdom that we now turn our gaze upon our young hero, Mr. Tom Jones, as he finds himself, for better or for worse, ensnared in the gilded cage of Lady Bellaston's affections. Affection's a word often employed to soften the edges of more mercenary transactions, particularly when a gentleman of modest fortune, or indeed, no fortune at all, stands in the shadow of a lady possessed of both wealth and rather robust appetites. You see, Tom, bless his honest, if sometimes misguided heart, was not one to languish in poverty when a comfortable hand was extended. And Lady Bellaston's hand, let me assure you, was not merely comfortable, it was adorned with diamonds and extended from an arm of considerable power in the fashionable world. She had, in short, taken a fancy to our handsome Foundling, a fancy that manifested itself not in sighs and sonnets, but in an altogether more practical, and indeed, more persuasive manner. His lodgings, once modest, and perhaps a trifle dingy, suddenly bloomed into an apartment worthy of a gentleman of independent means. His wardrobe, which had previously consisted of a few decent but well-worn suits, was now replenished with the finest broadcloth, silk stockings, and ruffles that proclaimed, in every stitch, a newfound prosperity. Carriages, once a rare luxury, now conveyed him through the bustling streets of London with the regularity of a clockwork mechanism. And, of course, there was the constant jingle of guineas in his pocket, a melody far sweeter to a hungry ear than any operatic aria. This, then, was the very essence of Lady Bellaston's patronage. It was a golden chain, forged not of malice, but of convenience and mutual, if unequal, benefit. For Tom, it was a reprieve from the harsh realities of a city that offered little quarter to the penniless. For Lady Bellaston, it was the acquisition of a handsome, spirited companion, one whose youth and vigor provided a delightful contrast to the jaded gentleman of her usual acquaintance. She enjoyed the pride of possession, the quiet triumph of having secured such a prize for her own amusement, away from the prying eyes and wagging tongues of society, though, truth be told, little truly escaped their notice in that gossipy age. But let us not be so quick to condemn our hero, for the path of virtue, when paved with stones of hunger and uncertainty, often yields to the smoother, albeit more perilous, road of expediency. Tom, while grateful for the bounty, was not blind to the implications. His heart, as we well know, was irrevocably given to the incomparable Sophia. And yet, here he was, playing the part of a kept man, accepting the largesse of another woman, one whose affections were as demanding as they were generous. There was an unspoken contract, an understanding etched not in ink, but in the knowing glances, the lingering touches, the carefully chosen gifts. Lady Bellaston expected his time, his attention, and, inevitably, his companionship in her private chambers. To refuse would be to bite the hand that fed him, to cast himself back into the very destitution from which she had so lavishly rescued him. This was the true nature of her patronage, a golden handshake with a silken cord attached. And so, Tom found himself living a life of superficial splendor, attending routs and masquerades, dining sumptuously, all while a growing unease gnawed at his conscience. He was a bird in a gilded cage, singing, perhaps, but longing for the open sky and the true mate he had left behind. The irony, of course, was that this very patronage, meant to ease his burdens, only served to entangle him further in the complicated web of London society, pushing him further from the very object of his purest desires. The comfort was immense, the cost immeasurable, for it was purchased with a piece of his freedom, and indeed, a sliver of his very soul. Such is the way of the world, my friends, where necessity often paints the most colorful of moral compromises. And thus, our hero, caught between the devil of destitution and the deep blue sea of obligation, continued to sail these treacherous waters, ever hoping for a favorable wind to guide him back to the shores of true love and honest living, yet ever more adrift in the luxurious currents of Lady Bellaston's favor. Chapter 15. Rock Bottom. A prison cell. The clang of the heavy iron door, a sound like a death knell, sealed Tom Jones into a fate he had, in his wildest youthful indiscretions, never imagined. No grand ballrooms now, no sun-drenched hunting fields, no warm bosoms of willing tavern wenches. Only the damp, biting chill of the stone walls, the stench of stale straw and human misery, and the oppressive, suffocating darkness that pressed in from every corner of his wretched cell. He slumped onto the rough wooden bench, his head throbbing, his arm aching where the guards had clutched him, but it was the gnawing ache in his very soul that truly crippled him. The blood of Mr. Fitzpatrick, a man he had never truly meant to harm, felt as though it still clung to his hands, a damning stain, murder. The word, a cold serpent, coiled itself around his heart, squeezing the last vestiges of hope from his lungs. All his impulsive actions, his heedless pursuit of pleasure, his often noble but ultimately reckless spirit had led him here. "Oh, Sophia!" Her name, a whisper on his parched lips, tasted of bitter ash. Every transgression, every flirtation, every moment of heedless forgetfulness of her pure, unwavering love now paraded before him, a procession of specters mocking his present plight. Had he not, in his foolish pride and unthinking passion, thrown away the most precious jewel? The thought of her sorrow, her potential contempt, was a torment far sharper than any physical pain, any fear of the gallows. This was rock bottom, indeed. Not merely a physical imprisonment, but a spiritual one. The walls of Newgate, but outward symbols of the deeper confinement within his own guilt-ridden conscience. Where were the sycophants now, the fair-weather friends who had cheered his generosity and flattered his virility? Vanished like phantoms at the first blush of misfortune's dawn. He was alone, utterly and terribly alone, with only his regrets for company. In this abyss, stripped bare of all pretense and prosperity, a stark truth began to form. His life, a vibrant tapestry woven with threads of good intention and careless abandon, now lay unraveled, a tangled mess. The question then became not merely of survival, but of meaning. Could a man so prone to error, so buffeted by the winds of passion, ever truly redeem himself? The silence of the cell, broken only by the distant clank of chains or the mournful cry of another lost soul, became a vast, unforgiving mirror. And in that mirror, Tom Jones saw not the dashing youth he had imagined himself to be, but a man flawed, vulnerable, and facing the ultimate reckoning. The path to redemption, if such a path existed, lay through this purgatory of despair, where the dross of his former self might, just might, be burned away, leaving behind something truer. This was the crucible, forged in sorrow and fear, where the true education of Tom Jones, the Foundling, was at last to begin, if he could survive the fire. Chapter 16. The great unraveling our tale, dear reader, now steers its course into waters most turbulent, where the placid surface of domestic felicity, so carefully nurtured within the walls of Paradise Hall, was about to be rent by the jagged reefs of calumny and misapprehension. For even as the benevolent sun of Mr. Allworthy's bounty shone with undiminished luster upon his little world, there lurked beneath the calm exterior of his household a serpent, whose venom had long been distilled and was now prepared for its decisive, insidious strike. It was upon a morning, crisp and deceptively bright, that Mr. Allworthy sat in his study, a chamber usually consecrated to meditations of philanthropy and the judicious management of his estate. Yet on this day, his brow was clouded, and a document, heavy with the weight of accusation, lay before him, having been recently delivered by a hand as false as the heart it served. This was not the idle gossip of servants, nor the harmless folly of youth, but a methodical, damning account, penned by Master Blifil himself, painting young Tom in colors so black, so utterly devoid of gratitude or decency, as to stun the very soul of his generous benefactor. Such depravity, Mr. Allworthy murmured, his voice a tremor of profound disappointment, such a willful plunge into the mire of vice. After all I have done. He reread the damning paragraphs, Tom's alleged riotous excesses in the nearby village, his continued association with persons of ill repute, the casual disregard for his own good name, and, most grievously, a perceived conspiracy to defraud Mr. Allworthy himself, cloaked beneath a feigned penitence. Each word a dagger struck not at Tom's body, but at the very fabric of Allworthy's hope, his benevolent philosophy concerning human nature. Blifil, meanwhile, bore himself with a countenance of sorrowful righteousness. He had presented his evidence with a carefully constructed reluctance, lamenting his painful duty to expose such misconduct. "It wounds me, sir, to the very quick," he had declared, dabbing a handkerchief to eyes remarkably dry, "to witness such a fall from grace in one so favored. Yet, for the sake of your honor, and indeed, for the preservation of this house from utter disgrace, silence would be a greater sin. Oh, the villainy woven into that feigned distress!" The subtle poison of suggesting that Tom's gratitude was but a mask for avarice, his affection a mere performance. But while the good Mr. Allworthy grappled with this bitter truth, and Blifil savored his quiet triumph, there was another heart within Paradise Hall that beat with a different, more turbulent rhythm. Miss Sophia Western, whose youthful spirit was as pure as the mountain spring, found herself assailed by a tempest of confusion and despair. News alleged misdeeds, delivered with much relish by Mrs. Blifil and other busybodies, had reached her delicate ears. Yet her intuition, that most reliable compass of a tender heart, rebelled against the pronouncements of his utter villainy. "It cannot be," she would whisper to herself, pacing her chamber, her silken slippers scarcely disturbing the fine carpets. "He has a fault or two, indeed, but his heart is good, of that I am certain." The picture painted by Blifil's reports, and echoed by the severe judgments of the household, was of a callous opportunist. But the Tom she knew, the one whose eyes held such warmth, whose spirit was so generous, whose very presence could banish gloom, that Tom could not be the monster they described. This dissonance, this profound chasm between what was said and what she instinctively felt, was Sophia's own agonizing unraveling, a slow, painful detachment from the received wisdom of her world. Thus did the seeds of suspicion and despair begin to germinate. Mr. Allworthy, convinced by what appeared to be irrefutable proof and the pious pronouncements of his nephew, felt the foundations of his faith in Tom crumbling. Sophia, torn between the authority of her elders and the unwavering conviction of her own heart, found her world twisting into a knot of perplexity. And Blifil, the architect of this ruin, stood by, serene and outwardly sorrowful, observing the great unraveling with a cold, calculating satisfaction. The stage was now set, dear reader, for consequences dire, and for a journey into the labyrinthine complexities of human character, where the path of truth is often obscured by the most artful deceptions. Chapter 17. The Challenge of Forgiveness. Ah, reader, what a peculiar thing is the human heart, and how often does it present us with dilemmas that vex the very soul! Our poor Mr. Jones, whom we left standing upon the precipice of a most bewildering revelation, now finds himself not merely challenged by external foes, but by the very tempest brewing within his own breast. The intricate web of deceit, so cunningly spun by Blifil, had at last unraveled before Tom's astonished gaze, revealing a tapestry woven with threads of malice, envy, and a cold calculation that struck deeper than any physical blow. To say Tom was merely angered would be to diminish the profound shock that coursed through him. It was a betrayal of the most intimate kind, a serpent warmed in the very bosom of family, a brother or so he had always believed who had plotted his ruin with a meticulous cruelty that bordered on the diabolical. The immediate impulse, as is natural for any man of spirit and a fiery constitution, was for a justice swift and uncompromising. His mind conjured images of Blifil stripped of his unearned advantages, exposed to the world for the vile hypocrite he was, and perhaps even suffering a measure of the calumny Tom himself had endured. A just retribution, one might cry, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But here, dear reader, lies the true test of a noble character, the crucible in which genuine virtue is forged. For whilst the thirst for vengeance may burn with a seductive heat, it is a flame that consumes not only the object of its ire, but often, more tragically, the heart that harbors it. Tom, for all his youthful impetuosity and occasional lapses in prudence, possessed a fundamental goodness, a benevolence instilled in him by the sainted Mr. Allworthy, whose precepts of charity and Christian forgiveness had, despite Tom's many wanderings from the straight path, taken root in his very being. He recollected Mr. Allworthy's gentle admonitions against allowing resentment to fester, his eloquent arguments for mercy, even towards those who have shown none. He recalled how his guardian had often distinguished between justice, which is the province of the law and God, and forgiveness, which is the exalted prerogative of the human spirit to rise above base passions. To forgive, Mr. Allworthy would declare, was not to excuse the offense, nor to condone the wrongdoer, but to liberate oneself from the chains of bitterness that bind the soul more tightly than any dungeon. Yet, to apply such lofty principles to Blifil, to the very man who had engineered his banishment, conspired to blacken his name, and perhaps even threatened the happiness of his beloved Sophia. Ah, this was a mountainous task. Could one truly forgive such calculated cruelty? Was it not a weakness, a tacit acceptance of villainy, to let such a viper escape without feeling the sting of its own poison? These questions wrestled within Tom's mind. A fierce contest between his injured pride and his inherent benevolence, between the immediate gratification of vengeance and the profound, albeit difficult, peace of forgiveness. He paced his chamber, the revelations playing themselves over and over, each detail a fresh barb in his wounded spirit. He saw Blifil's smug face, heard his feigned pieties, remembered the sly insinuations that had so successfully poisoned Allworthy's mind against him, and with each memory, the temptation to condemn, to demand the fullest measure of earthly retribution, grew stronger. But then, a different current would flow through him. He thought of Mr. Allworthy, whose own boundless generosity extended even to those who had deeply disappointed him. He thought of Sophia, whose gentle spirit could surely never countenance sustained animosity. And perhaps, most profoundly, he considered the very nature of happiness itself. Could true contentment truly reside in a heart consumed by hatred, even if that hatred were entirely justified? No, a voice whispered within him, such a state would be a perpetual torment, a self-inflicted wound. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of somber purple and fiery orange, mirroring the turbulent landscape of Tom's soul. He sat by the window, gazing out, and slowly, imperceptibly, a shift began. It was not a sudden, miraculous absolution, nor a swift erasure of the pain. No, the wounds were too deep for that. But rather, it was the dawning of an understanding that whilst Blifil's actions were unforgivable in their malice, the act of forgiveness was not for Blifil, but for himself. It was a freeing, a release from the dark prison of resentment. The path would be arduous, undoubtedly. To genuinely forgive, to let go of the desire for revenge, would require a strength of character far exceeding that needed to merely condemn. It was a challenge that would test the very fiber of his being, a test of whether he truly embodied the virtues he had been taught. And as the night deepened, Tom Jones, ever the flawed but noble hero, resolved to face this profound challenge, to strive for that difficult, divine grace which alone could heal the deepest of wounds. The journey towards forgiveness had begun. Chapter 18. Fortune's wheel turns. Alas, dear reader, how swiftly the hand of fate can turn the grandest tapestry to threads, transforming the very foundation of a man's existence. It was with such a sudden, bewildering twist that the serene household of Squire Allworthy was plunged into a profound disquiet, a gloom deeper than any winter's shadow. For the good squire, that very embodiment of benevolence and reason, was taken ill not with a passing fever, but with an ailment so acute, so relentless, that whispers of his impending demise began to circulate through the halls of Paradise Hall like a chilling draught. The physician, a man of grave pronouncements and little efficacy, shook his head with a practiced solemnity that spoke volumes more than his latinate mutterings. Death, that indiscriminate guest, was knocking at the door of the most virtuous of men. This dire prospect naturally drew all within the orbit of Allworthy's fortune to gather. There was Mr. Blifil, ever the dutiful nephew, whose countenance was etched with a sorrow so profound it seemed almost theatrically perfect. Beside him stood his mother, Miss Bridget, her handkerchief ever at the ready for a fresh outpouring of grief. And then there were the tutors, Messrs. Thwackum and Square, their habitual severity softened, or perhaps merely altered, by a palpable anticipation. But our Tom, poor honest, open-hearted Tom Jones, his grief was of an entirely different cloth. His sorrow was not for the prospect of earthly loss, nor for any calculation of inheritance, but for the impending departure of the man who had been a father, a mentor, and a steadfast beacon in his turbulent young life. His tears flowed freely, unbidden, staining cheeks unaccustomed to such profound despair. He had no thought for wills or legacies, only for the fading light in the eyes of his benefactor. It was amidst this heavy air, thick with both genuine and counterfeit sorrow, that Mr. Dowling, the solicitor from a neighboring town, arrived. He was a man accustomed to the solemn theater of final testaments, bearing with him the parchment scroll that held the written decree of the squire's wishes. The assembled family and household members gathered in the great parlor, where a fire crackled with a false cheer that did little to warm the frigid atmosphere. Mr. Dowling, with a clearing of his throat and a rustle of paper, began to read. The words fell upon the ears of those assembled like stones upon still water, each clause rippling with implications. Lands, estates, annuities all meticulously accounted for. As the reading progressed, a subtle but significant shift began to occur. Master Blifil's face, initially a mask of pious sorrow, began to betray a nascent, almost imperceptible flicker of satisfaction. The eyes of Thwackum and Square, too, held a certain knowing glint. And then, the decree concerning Tom Jones. The provision for him was so meager, so utterly disproportionate to the love and affection Allworthy had always shown him, that a gasp, quickly stifled, passed through the room. A sum that barely scraped above common charity, a pittance compared to the vast inheritance bestowed upon Blifil. The squire, it seemed, had left almost everything to his legitimate nephew, Blifil, and precious little to the boy he had raised as his own. Poor Tom, whose heart bled not for the lands or coffers, but for the man he truly loved, was utterly bewildered by this unexpected turn. He had never considered himself an heir, yet the stark reality of his sudden disinheritance, a formal rejection from the family he cherished, pierced him deeply. He looked from the pale, drawn face of Allworthy to the smug composure of Blifil, and a cold dread began to settle upon his soul. The world, he suddenly understood, was a far more perilous and treacherous place than his innocent heart had ever allowed him to imagine. Thus, dear reader, did Fortune, that fickle and blind goddess, commence her cruel sport, elevating the undeserving whilst casting down the truly noble of heart. The wheel had turned, and our Tom, through no fault of his own, found himself at its lowest point, his prospects suddenly shrouded in uncertainty, his future an ominous blank. The seeds of his coming trials were sown in that very moment, under the false piety of Paradise Hall. My dear friends, gather close, for tonight we embark on a journey not through the dusty annals of history, but into the very heart of what it means to truly live and to live well. We speak, of course, of that most charming, most flawed, yet undeniably good-hearted fellow Tom Jones. Many see his misadventures, his follies, his youthful exuberance leading him into one scrape after another. But peel back those layers, and you find a soul perpetually inclined towards kindness, generosity, and genuine affection. This chapter, then, isn't a rigid self-improvement regimen, but an invitation, a 7-day action plan to cultivate the very essence of Tom's good heart within your own breast. Think of it not as tasks, but as daily contemplations, gentle nudges towards a more compassionate existence. Stesk Day 1. The open hand of generosity. Tom, bless his impulsive nature, was ever ready to give, even when he had little to spare. A shilling to a beggar, a kind word to a stranger, his very coat off his back if he thought it would alleviate suffering. Today, consider where can you extend your own open hand, not necessarily with coin, but with time, with attention, with a genuine desire to uplift. Can you offer a sincere compliment? Hold a door, lend a truly listening ear. It's the small, uncalculated acts that often resonate deepest, echoing Tom's spontaneous kindness. Shchek's Day 2. The understanding gaze of empathy's Tom moved through society, observing, absorbing, and connecting with souls from every station. He saw the humanity in the scoundrel and the saint alike. For today, let us practice this understanding gaze. Before judgment forms, pause. Seek to understand the struggles, the fears, the motivations that might drive another. Walk a mile in their shoes, as the saying goes, even if only in your imagination. How might their circumstance differ from your own? This doesn't mean condoning wrong, but comprehending its roots. Shchek's Day 3. The spirit of forgiveness. Oh, how many times was Tom wronged, betrayed, or simply misunderstood? Yet, malice rarely lingered in his heart. He was quick to anger, yes, but quicker still to forgive, to let go of grudges that would poison lesser souls. Today, reflect on any lingering resentments you carry. Is there a burden you can lighten, a past hurt you can release? Forgiveness, remember, is often a gift we give ourselves, liberating us from the heavy chains of bitterness. It is not forgetting, but choosing peace over pain. Act Day 4. The courage of conviction distrisk when justice called, when a vulnerable soul needed defending. Tom Jones, for all his youthful indiscretions, rarely faltered. He would leap into the fray, not for glory, but because his very being demanded it. Today, find your own quiet courage. Where might you stand up for what is right, even if it's unpopular? Where can you lend your voice to the voiceless? It could be a difficult conversation, a principled stand, or simply refusing to participate in gossip. Let your conviction be your guide, guided by a good heart. Shchek's Day 5. The resilience of learning docs. Tom made mistakes. Plenty of them. His path was strewn with misguided choices and passionate errors. Yet, he never let these define him or harden his core. He learned, he grew, and his inherent goodness shone through the dust of his follies. Today, acknowledge your own imperfections. Rather than dwelling in shame or regret, ask, what lesson does this teach me? How can I rise not as a perfect being, but as a wiser, kinder one? This is the heart that endures, not despite its scars, but because of them. Ask Day 6. The joy of authenticity. Sex. Tom Jones, for better or worse, was authentically Tom Jones. He wore no masks, practiced no elaborate deceits to hide his true nature, though sometimes prudence might have served him well. Today, embrace your own genuine self. In a world clamoring for conformity, dare to be authentically you. Speak your truth with kindness, act with integrity, and let your unique light shine. There is a profound freedom in being true to one's own good heart, untainted by pretense. Shchek's Day 7. The gratitude for life's richness. Despite his trials, Tom possessed an unshakable zest for life, a capacity for joy in simple pleasures, a deep appreciation for beauty and companionship. For your final day of contemplation, let gratitude fill your spirit. Look around you, truly see the blessings, big and small. The warmth of the sun, the laughter of a friend, the comfort of a meal. A grateful heart expands, making room for even more goodness to enter. This deep appreciation is the wellspring from which all other virtues flow. And so, my friends, our week of reflection concludes. To live with a good heart, as Tom Jones unwittingly taught us, is not to be flawless, but to be perpetually striving for good. It is to acknowledge our human frailty, yet always lean into compassion, generosity, and an unyielding belief in the inherent goodness of humanity. Go forth then, and let your own good heart light your way. My dear reader, let us for a moment step back from the bustling thoroughfare of our narrative and survey the landscape of Tom Jones's life from a higher vantage point. It is a life, I assure you, marked not merely by adventure and affection, but by the profound and peculiar circumstances of his birth. To truly understand our hero, we must distill the essence of what it means to be a foundling, and in doing so, we uncover 3 enduring truths that have shaped his very soul, truths that echo far beyond his particular tale. The first truth, stark and often cruel, is the enigma of origin. To be found, rather than born into a known family, is to begin life under a perpetual question mark. Society, alas, is quick to fill such blanks with suspicion, with gossip, and with a pervasive sense of stigma. For Tom, this meant being branded not by character, but by circumstance. He was Jones, the foundling, a label that preceded his every action, casting a long, often unjust, shadow upon his worth. His very existence was an inconvenience, a mystery demanding explanation, and in its absence, inviting conjecture. This truth speaks to the universal human need for belonging, for a rootedness in the past, and to the profound burden of its denial. It forces one, from the tenderest years, to confront an existential void, to build a self without the comforting scaffold of lineage, and to contend with the silent judgments of a world that often measures a man by his birthright, rather than his inherent nature. It is a profound disinheritance, not merely of property, but of identity itself, compelling the individual to constantly prove their right to exist, their right to love, and their right to happiness, against a tide of inherited prejudice. Yet from this initial void springs the second, more glorious truth, the forge of character citrisk. For if one cannot claim virtue by inheritance, one must forge it in the crucible of experience. A foundling, unencumbered by the expectations of an ancestral name, is paradoxically free to write their own story upon the blank slate of their existence. Tom, despite his youthful follies and passionate indiscretions, was blessed with a heart overflowing with benevolence, a spirit incapable of malice, and a courage that flared in the face of injustice. His generosity knew no bounds, his loyalty was unwavering, and his capacity for sincere affection was profound. It was not his unknown parentage, but his innate goodness, his spontaneous acts of kindness, his very capacity to love and be loved, that truly defined him. He proved, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that nobility resides not in blood, but in virtue, that a man's worth is measured not by the circumstances of his cradle, but by the conduct of his life. This truth shines brightest, asserting that while fortune may set the stage, it is character that writes the enduring play, proving that integrity and compassion are treasures far more valuable than any inheritance. And finally, we arrive at the third truth, often the most dramatically satisfying, the revelation of providence. For though shadows may long obscure the path, and injustice seem to hold sway, there is, I contend, a profound sense of order in the universe, a thread of fate, or perhaps simply the relentless march of justice, that eventually brings all secrets to light. Tom's arduous journey, fraught with misunderstanding, betrayals, and near catastrophe, was ultimately a pilgrimage towards self-discovery and rightful place. The layers of deception, so carefully woven by malice and misunderstanding, were systematically peeled back, revealing his true parentage, elevating him from a stigmatized foundling to the rightful heir of all Worthy's affections and estate. This revelation is far more than a mere plot device. It is a profound commentary on the human yearning for truth, for belonging, and for the eventual restoration of order. It tells us that even the deepest mysteries of one's origin can, and often will, be brought into the clear light of day, offering not just an answer, but a sense of closure, of justice, and of one's true place in the grand tapestry of life. Thus, my friends, Tom Jones's life as a foundling is not merely a tale of unfortunate beginnings, but a testament to the enduring power of humanity. It teaches us that while the past may cast a long shadow, it is the light of one's own character that illuminates the present, and the eventual dawn of truth that defines the future. These three truths, interwoven like the strands of a tapestry, paint a portrait of resilience, virtue, and ultimately, triumphant belonging. A foundling's life, therefore, becomes a mirror, reflecting the universal journey of self-discovery and the timeless quest for one's true place in the world. The final page hath turned, my most patient and amiable reader, and our long sojourn with Mr. Tom Jones, that fellow of such lively parts and unfortunate accidents, doth at last conclude. We have traversed the winding roads of Somerset and the bustling thoroughfares of London, dined in humble inns and grand estates, witnessed the tender flutterings of love and the bitter sting of deceit. Our hero, after 1,000 perils and 100,000 blunders, finds his true reward, and the lovely Sophia, that paragon of sense and virtue, her well-deserved happiness. A pleasing tableau, is it not? A comfort to the heart that, after all the tumultuous storms, the sun may indeed shine brightest upon the righteous. But hark ye, gentle friend, do you imagine the journey ends with the wedding bells and the settled estate? Ah, no. For life, dear reader, is no mere volume to be read, closed, and set upon a shelf, its characters forever frozen in their final tableau. The world spins on, and with it, the lives of our beloved Tom and Sophia, of Allworthy and Western, of the many scoundrels and saints we have encountered. They will face new mornings, new challenges, new joys, and perchance, new sorrows. Virtue, whilst triumphant, must ever be vigilant. Prudence, having learned its hard lessons, must now stand sentinel. And so it is with thee, my esteemed companion. Thou hast traveled these pages alongside us, a silent observer, a sympathetic judge, a fellow pilgrim through the landscape of human nature. Thou hast seen how easily good intentions may be misconstrued, how cunning can masquerade as wisdom, and how true worth often lies hidden beneath a rough exterior. Thou hast learned, I trust, that fortune is a fickle mistress, but that a truly good heart, though often buffeted, possesses an inner compass that, in time, will steer it towards its proper harbor. This, then, is not an end, but a transition. For the greatest journey, my friend, is not the one we have taken through these chapters, but the one thou dost undertake each day. As Tom, amidst his trials, was ever called to choose between generosity and self-interest, between honor and temptation, so too art thou presented with myriad choices. Will thy heart remain open to the plights of others, or will it harden against the world's inevitable imperfections? Wilt thou distinguish between the outward show and the inner substance? Wilt thou cultivate that natural benevolence that, like the sun, can warm and brighten even the coldest day? Let not the closing of this tale mean the closing of thy mind, or the sealing of thy heart. Carry forth the spirit of Tom's good nature, tempered by Sophia's prudence and Allworthy's wisdom. Observe the world around thee with renewed insight. See the Blifils and Thwackums, the Lady Bellastons and the Partridges, not merely as characters in a book, but as archetypes ever present in the grand theater of life. Learn from their follies, celebrate their virtues, and navigate thy own path with a keen eye and an honest soul. For the narrative of thy own existence is far from complete. It is a story yet unfolding, chapter by chapter, day by day. Let it be a tale of growing wisdom, of abiding kindness, and of an unyielding pursuit of that genuine happiness which springs not from fortune alone, but from a virtuous heart and a well-ordered mind. The pen, my friend, is now in thy hand. Continue thy journey, and may it be filled with adventures, lessons, and ultimately, a reward as just and sweet as that which awaited our dear Tom Jones. Farewell for now, and may Providence guide thy steps.